Good morning. It is Thursday, February the 21st, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I know better. I know that where one stands politically is not where one stands on the, quote, issues, unquote, but where one stands on change. And that I am conservative because I make the presumption for the status quo instead of making the presumption for change. So I'm going to do things a little bit different today. Instead of doing my usual intro and monologue. There's a book that I've read it before on when my show was called Storytime, and it's a nonfiction work, Management of the Absurd, Paradoxes in Leadership by Richard Farson. And there's a lot of things that are going on in the world today that made me think of this particular chapter. It's chapter 13, Every Act is a Political Act. I've always thought of myself as being, and this is the author talking, I've always thought of myself as being in the business of human liberation. Yet, over the years, while working as a psychologist, a therapist, or a consultant, I have tried to, quote, cure, unquote, homosexuals, to teach bosses to, quote, manage, quote, unquote, employees, to train teachers to, quote, handle, unquote, students, and to help parents, quote, unquote, control their children. In each case, I was working for the powerful against the powerless and doing it in the name of a professional attempt at human liberation. No, he wasn't. What he was doing was, in the case of the curing homosexuals, was he was doing something as if we're going to go by today's standards, that was wrong, that homosexuality is not a disease to be cured. Okay, he was wasting his time and he's doing something wrong. And that's the issue with when you're teaching bosses to manage, teaching teachers to handle, teaching parents to control. The issue is not in teaching those things in and of themselves, because teaching those things in and of themselves are fine. The issue is, are you teaching them the right things to do or the wrong things to do? If you teach the parents and the teachers how to abuse their children, their students, you're doing things wrong. If you're teaching bosses to manage their employees in such a way as to improve their productivity, you're doing things right. And all of this crap about politics, now every act is a political act, is ultimately an escape. It is a way of escaping ethics, which is, by the way, inescapable. So you end up pretending to escape ethics. Back to the book. My experience has made me rethink my conduct as a manager. I've come to realize that every management act is a political act. No, it isn't. By this I mean that every management act in some way redistributes or reinforces power. As managers, we sometimes engage in these acts consciously, as when we take care to promote African Americans and other minorities over their white counterparts. But most often we perform these acts unconsciously, as when we direct our conversation more to the men in a meeting than to the women. And again, he's wrong. Those aren't political acts. Those are acts that should be, that's not the norm with which to judge these acts. You judge them, and as a matter of fact, saying that they're political is really opting out of the whole judgment situation. You're saying there are no norms, and that it's just basically the winners, the trophy goes to the strongest. Basically, that's what politics is all about: power, right? The power of the powerless, as he was saying. But in actuality, it's really about, it's inescapable, is ethics. When you are promoting African Americans over their white counterparts, you're ostensibly doing that as part of an equal opportunity program where you have African Americans that are at least equally, if not better qualified than their white counterparts, and you make sure that the African Americans get promoted ahead of the whites to kind of even the score. Let's see. And then when you're directing your conversation more to men than to a women in the meeting, if you're doing that because you have some kind of stereotype going on, then you're doing something wrong, and it's bad for your business, and you should stop it and correct the mistake. But it has nothing to do with politics. Back to the book. Here are some other examples of political acts we might witness in an organization. Hiring a woman as a secretary and a man as a management trainee. Switching to part-time or contract employees to avoid paying benefits. Maintaining wage differentials between men and women. Hiring a relative. Building a ramp for handicapped workers. Staking out a corner office. Running an advertisement showing a woman admiring her clean laundry. Retiring people at age 65 or very often younger. When a woman friend of mine had a baby, she decided to give up her vice presidency and start an entrepreneurial enterprise that would enable her to work almost entirely from home. She wanted to be with her child during the early years. This is a political act, as the actions being taken by many companies now, job sharing, flex time, telecommuting, child care services, to keep such women from leaving, is also a political act. But he's wrong. It's not a political act. It is an act of independence, and if he's defining political act as the helping the powerful over the powerless or the powerless over the powerful, I don't see where this woman is acting, where the powerful and the powerless are in conflict here. I don't see it. She went ahead, left her company, started her own business so that she could have the best of both worlds. Maybe she'll have it. Maybe she won't. Maybe she's right to do that. Maybe she's wrong to do that. Maybe the company that she left was wrong to let her go. Maybe in the company's best interest, it would have been better. Because again, she's vice president. We're not talking about somebody that's pushing a broom or a mop that you can just, they leave, you go ahead and you can hire a replacement in 5 seconds. Vice presidents are usually pretty hard to find. So maybe they made a mistake and their business is going to suffer because they let her go and start her own business. But that's a business decision. And again, the norm is right or wrong. Did they do the right thing via their business? Did she do the right thing for herself and her family? And it has nothing to do with politics. For your own good, our inability as managers to think in political terms tends to make us look at people as if they have personal problems, when many times their problems are a result of their place in the power structure of our society. Modern life burdens people in so many ways that are independent of any personal qualities. They're buffeted about in crowded urban settings, or lonely and isolated in suburbs, or are weighed down by the effects of round-the-clock parenthood. Changes in their situations are much more likely to improve their lot in life than counseling them as if their problems were matters of personality or character. Similarly, making changes in the work environment, redesigning the office layout, shifting reporting relationships, altering schedules, is more likely to lead to behavior change than is, say, management training. A highly regarded executive secretary I know began to make a lot of mistakes in her work. She was coached and counseled to no avail. Finally, because another executive was in a jam and without help, she was transferred to work with him. To everyone's relief, her work regained and even surpassed its original excellent quality. A new environment and new relationships were all that it took. Who are the best managers? Who are the managers who keep people from working at their best as a result of political discrimination? All of us, and we do it unknowingly. Very often these acts are committed with the best of intentions. There's a history, for example, of legislation by male lawmakers to protect women in the workplace, preventing them from having to lift heavy packages, guaranteeing them coffee breaks, providing cots in their restrooms, and making it illegal to require overtime work. But that very legislation has protected women into second-class status, many of them into poverty. Even now, women make only 75% of the pay men get for the same work. They are systematically excluded from management roles because it has been difficult for many managers to see how someone who has to have a cot in her restroom or cannot be worked overtime should be put in a leadership position. That is why we have civil rights, not only to protect us from bad people, but to protect us from good people as well, from people who think they know what's good for us. After all, tyrants have always acted in the best interests of their people, or so they thought. And there's some points, some interesting points here, and he kind of blends things in, I want to say convoluted, but that's not the word I'm really looking for. It is conflate. He's conflating things. So he says that he's talking about in the beginning of the paragraph, the first paragraph, he's saying, talking about not dependence, but determinism. He says here when people are treated as though they have personal problems, instead their problems are a result of their place in the power structure of our society. Modern life burdens people. They're buffeted about in crowded urban settings, or lonely and isolated in suburbs, or weighed down by the effects of around-the-clock parenthood. Changes in their situations are much more likely to prove their lot in life than counseling them. But again, it's deterministic in nature. You can't. Determinism is the fiction that no one has any free will. Okay, and that's important because everything changes in terms of relationships when you have, if you're pretending that everything is determined, rather than acknowledging independence and free will. For instance, homelessness. If everybody's determined, then the only reason people are living on the street is because they're forced to. So what do? Well, we find an organization, and first of all, you've got to find out why are they forced to. Well, ultimately, it's always about capitalism. It's because greedy capitalists are forcing the homeless to live on the street because they're charging too much for rent. So what do? Well, we find a bigger bully than the business people to push around the business people and force them to do the right thing, force them to lower the rents so people can go ahead and have a place to live. And that bigger bully is the government. All big government things that are about changing people's habits, for instance, getting people off the street, getting people to quit smoking, are based on this fiction of determinism. So, and that's what he's implying here is about buffeting about and changes in their situations. Now, the executive secretary began to make a lot of mistakes in her work. She was coached and counseled to no avail. Finally, she was changed her reality. That's another thing about the left, is that the left loves imagination. They love to live in their heads. They love visions. They like to have visions and whatnot. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to go out and actually create the society that they envision. They want somebody else to do that. And that's what conservatives are for, as far as they're concerned. Conservatives should basically just shut the hell up and do as they're told. The left will come up with the ideas, the dreams, the visions, and the right will carry them out. In any case, this shows the importance of reality, because the other thing is that with the left is they suggest that everything is a matter of attitude. Reality doesn't really exist. That everything is a matter of attitude, and whether or not things are good or bad, it depends on people's attitudes. You change people's attitudes, you change reality. No, as this paragraph proved, the secretary was counseled. They first approached it as an attitude problem. It says here, she was coached and counseled to no avail. They first approached this as an attitude problem. This woman has a bad attitude. But then when they finally switched her, gave her somebody else to work with and a different work to do, a different reality, they addressed the reality of the situation, guess what? Everything improved. So, and that's, again, very important for some very obvious reasons. But a lot of times it's hard to spot when you're dealing with politicians and activists. So you got to kind of be alert for when people are trying to give you this attitude business. When I was growing up, I lived in a foster home, and the parents were socialists. They never ever quoted Marx. They never went out and advocated rent control or anything like that, but it was the way they ran the household that years later I put it together. Whoa, they're socialists. I was wondering why they were such jerks. And I couldn't figure it out for years, and then finally dawned on me, they're socialists. This is why they do it. And everything with them was an attitude problem. If you had a headache, no matter what your issue was, your problem was, you would usually get a statement to the effect of, "Oh, you're just fill in the blank." Their favorite was, "You're just lazy." Okay, and then if you any problem, it was always for them an attitude problem. Now, the dynamic of that situation is then, since They're not going to treat the underlying cause of the problem, whatever it is, the reality of the problem, whatever it is that's truly getting in the way of me, doing better things, whether it is mowing the lawn or taking out the trash or doing my homework or whatever. Instead of dealing with those realities, they call it an attitude problem, scold me, walk away. Well, guess what happens to the problem? It continues. So the next time this problem appears, guess what? Now they're really pissed off because now they figure that I am, not only do I have a bad attitude, but then now I am purposefully displaying this bad attitude just to piss them off. And they would say things like that, to that effect. Are you trying to make me mad? So, and then when you get right down to it and you solve the real problem, whatever in reality that is the barrier between being a better child, being a better parent, being a better employee, guess what? It works. And you see improvements. Let's see. Now he says that we have civil rights not to protect us from bad people, but protect us from good people as well. From people who think they know what's good for us. And again, when he's talking about the 75% of pay men get and their women are protected and they have cots in their restrooms, a lot of that is wrong. It's not politics. It's not, men don't go out and put cots into women's restrooms because they want to dominate women, because they want to, keep women as second-class citizens. They do it in error. Because they are stereotyping. Well, what is it we think women would want? Well, women have their time of the month, so I guess we'll get them a cot in their restroom. That's just stereotyping. And that's what what is going on here are, in some cases, personal problems, but mistakes either way. And one of the biggest mistakes you can make is stereotyping. But you get people to quit stereotyping, and you're going to find that you're going to be able to make improvements you couldn't make before. You're going to see dramatic changes. But his last statement is also, where is it here? Oh, after all, tyrants have always acted in the best interests of their people, or so they thought. And truer statement has never been written. Good for him. The important feature. Having had my political consciousness raised a bit on these issues, I can now recognize that when I sit across the desk from a woman, the overwhelming feature of her life is that she is a woman. The one fact that is likely to be more important to what she's experiencing in life than her personality, her character, or her behavior. The same is true for men. At a men's group discussion I once attended, one member said he would like to talk about what it's like to be in a men's restroom where the urinals are against the wall, and when it is crowded, men stand in lines facing each urinal, waiting their turn. Sometimes when a man gets to the head of the line and feels the pressure of those waiting behind him, he has difficulty starting the urinary flow. Within seconds, he begins to panic, sometimes zipping up and leaving rather than face the humiliation of standing there so long that those behind him begin to wonder. Why, asked this man, are we supposed to be so good at this? And of course, the answer was that it is part of a larger pressure on men to produce and perform. The members of the group were discovering the power of the sex role in their areas of their lives that they had never considered. And it's crap. It's just one of those things. I've experienced that too. Go up to the urinal and you got people waiting, and you don't want somebody to be, come on. You don't want to, because again, what actually may end up happening is you may end up getting into a fist fight. And who wants to end up getting into a fist fight with their dingle hanging out? Nobody wants that. Okay, it has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with why are we supposed to be good at it. Okay, it just has nothing to do with it. He just makes it up on that one. So, a useful exercise. Managers understandably resist having to think in political terms, but the alternative is to run headlong into trouble that we won't see coming. Sometimes the outcome of this is costly, as it is when employees file suits for sexual harassment. But political consequences extend far beyond sexual politics. I once involved a group of managers in an exercise to understand the challenge they faced. Across the top of a blackboard, we listed various groups represented by liberation movements at the time: African Americans, Latinos, Asians, women, men, children, gays, handicapped, and so on. Down the side, we listed areas of management decision-making: recruiting, staffing, training, compensation, production, marketing, advertising, facilities, communication, and so on. We then drew lines down and across the blackboard, creating a matrix in which each square represented the interaction of a management area with a liberation group. We were soon into a lively discussion of the problems created or the advantages given to these groups in each management area. For example, at the juncture of facilities and women, the participants thought of the design of office space that creates what has been referred to pejoratively as a hen house, a cluster of female secretaries and assistants in a windowless area surrounded by private offices for executives. They discussed recruiting that fails to solicit applications from overlooked groups such as the handicapped, choosing a plant site that would create transportation hardships for inner city groups, automating production and thereby reducing the power of labor organizations, failing to promote overweight employees, and so on. The list of situations that this exercise generates is virtually endless, making it quite illuminating and consciousness-raising. BS. Such thinking will never become easy for us because it is impossible to predict the next group that will make the liberation demands. But we can keep our minds open and responsive, remembering not to dismiss these new demands simply because we did not expect that group to be discontented. Initially, all such demands have appeared to most people to be wrong, puzzling, unfair, impertinent, even ridiculous. We have learned that, in time, this perception changes. And the problem is that we aren't groups. We're individuals. And problems are individualistic. And this is one of the scams that the left likes to pull off. They like to make all problems collective problems. Because if they're collective problems, they require collective solutions. They require organization, they require unionization, and they require politicization. Anyways, politicizing. You have to politicize them. So every answer becomes an answer of politics or of legislation. We got to create a new law to fix this group of people, to make them more equal. And it's BS. As far as the hen house is concerned, just because, let's say that this is a stereotypical situation. Men in the organization have a stereotype about women. They would feel more comfortable if they were with their own, so we'll put them all together in the center of the office, and everybody will be happy. Just because you're treated with a stereotype doesn't mean you have to act that way. The newest stereotype in the United States of America, it's been going on for about the past 10, 20, maybe 30 years, is that all white people are racist. Okay? And that you're assumed to be, and this is what they're encouraging people to do, is to assume that white people are racist until proven otherwise. Stereotype. That doesn't mean that just because people want to stereotype me that way, and very often they will do so with various questions I'll get from people about what I think, how I vote, etc. And the first thing I do is I immediately confront them and say, oh, so you mean because I'm white, I must therefore be a racist? Okay? The same thing women can do. An individual woman, if she's being treated in a stereotypical fashion, can challenge that. We all have free will. Okay, we don't have to, when we're applying for a job, we can look, where is it I'm going to be expected to work? If I'm going to be working in a hen house, and I'm a woman and I don't like that, I don't want to work in the hen house, I say no thank you. Skip the application, tear it up, and I'll work somewhere else. Okay. It's not a political issue. You don't have to run to your legislator and say, ooh, these awful people have created a hen house. Please write a law banning hen houses. Let's see, a balancing act. It would be naive to suggest that greater political awareness will occur without setbacks. In fact, lately we have worked ourselves into a troubling predicament. Fighting for the rights of special groups has contributed to an erosion of civility that none of us anticipated. When people are treated as representatives of special groups, society is fragmented. It may even be that progress on rights has been made at the expense of the common welfare. Enmity grows between groups as they compete for rights. Rather than looking after the community, each group looks after itself. The common welfare suffers. The achievement and preservation of community must become our top priority. Otherwise, the concept of rights has no meaning. Rights to what, if not access to community? BS. Another BS thing. Again, he assumes that rights are communal. And they're not. Rights are individual. There's no such thing as group rights. There's no such thing as men's rights, and there's no such thing as women's rights. There's no such thing as white rights, black rights, Latino rights. There's no such thing as straight rights, and there's no such thing as gay rights. There is the rights of the individual, no matter who you are, regardless of your gender, sexual orientation, or race. Back to the book. Sometimes the realization that every act is a political act can seem paralyzingly absurd, and the demands of group politics further complicate the already complex realities that managers face every day. Nevertheless, we cannot turn away from them. Rather, we must balance our accommodations to them with an exercise of judgment that assures the stability and success of the total organization. And right there, he kind of stumbles onto the truth. He wraps it up with a kind of a truth. And the idea here is the success of the organization. And that has little or nothing to do with politics. Because you're talking with an organization that it's going to have everything to do with the bottom line. Either they're making money or they're not making money. And you're going to do what is reasonably required to make money. And if that fails, so be it. You do what's right and you let the chips fall where they may. Might doesn't make right. The ends don't justify the means. And it is the individuals. All problems are individual problems, not group problems. But anyways, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And before I sign off, I did want to remind everybody that I was reading from Chapter 13 of Management of the Absurd, Paradoxes in Leadership by Richard Farson, and you could probably get it on Amazon. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.